second hat, Jim. I'm the rector of St. George's Lowville. I work nationally on planting churches in Canada. And I think that there are two distinct streams that are going to happen within Canadian Anglicanism. The one will be sort of strategic, where we as the Anglican Network in Canada say we believe that God's calling us to plant a church in that city. But that's limited in its reach. We can only do so many of those over the next 5 years. What can happen is if there's a divine move of God across our country and people respond by faith, then what we have is not a church planting movement, but a Jesus movement. And then those people necessarily come together in worshiping communities around the gospel, around the Lord. And what is that? It's a church. Well, we're seeing this happen all across Canada. In fact, our little church, St. George's Lowville, we've planted 4 churches over the last year in exactly this way.
Really?
And the cost is high. I mean, we see it in a dip in our attendance, but we believe in this.
Now, when you plant a church, you got to have a rector, right? Or are you the rector overseeing these?
For now, what we're doing is this has forced us to rethink the whole way that we do church. Up to this point in Anglicanism, we have called the trained. People go to seminary, the bishop approves it, then they get called. But we're looking at an entire shift in that model where we train the called and where pastors are put in place, lay pastors under a local rector, released in ministry. And during the first couple of years, they're training, they're discerning a call to vocational ministry. The bishop is watching, and at the end of the day, he lays hands on them and ordains them. So it's a whole different model of Anglicanism. But I think it's Anglicanism at its best. I mean, the strength of the Anglican model is that the bishop is the guy that pulls the trigger.
Yeah.
You don't have to wade through all kinds of red tape.
Yeah, there's not a lot of voting. There's not much democracy.
That's right. We have theocracy, right?
which is great until from time to time you get a bishop who maybe is not so great. What are the chances that this 33rd province is going to be recognized by Canterbury?
It's a good question. Yeah. It's a good question. In fact, that's one way of approaching it. The other way of approaching the same question is to say, what will be the role of Canterbury 10 years from now?
Right.
Because 70 of the 77 million Anglicans worldwide live in the 2/3 world and have remained true to the scriptures as they've received them. It's this interesting reverse missionary phenomenon. You know, we in the Western world took the gospel to the 2/3 world, and now they're calling us back to it. But the numbers are heavily weighted so that 70 million are in the 2/3 world. Canterbury has to decide, will he side with the 7 million who have all the money, or the 70 million who have the power of the gospel, are going ahead with mission, planting churches, and in fact planting entire dioceses?
Now, I've heard talk, and I'm sure that's all it is. I'd like your perspective on it, however, of Jerusalem becoming the new Canterbury for this emerging, revitalized Anglican church. Is there any strength to that?
There was a conference a year and a half ago in Jerusalem called the Global Anglican Futures Conference, where the archbishops who represent the 70 million got together and they charted out something called the Jerusalem Declaration. It was nothing new or novel. In fact, it was just the kerygma. It was the paradosis. It was the Christianity that's been passed on through the ages. So certainly Jerusalem has been big in our history as a movement already.
And you've had a presence with Christ Church in Jerusalem for about 200 years.
That's right.
It's quite fascinating to me because my son Jess is now on staff there, and in fact was one of the what do you call them, presiding deacons or whatever at the commission.
The subdeacon.
Subdeacon at the consecration of the bishops last week. But I find it very intriguing to think that you might end up with kind of the central directives coming out of Jerusalem. I mean, it sounds awfully biblical to me.
Right back to the first century, Jim, in every way. I mean, that's what we're praying for.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How long have you been now an ordained Anglican rector?
I've been at St. George's for 5 years and rector for almost 2. I'm following Charlie Masters, who was the rector there for 28 years, so I figure I'll be the new rector for at least 20-some years. You know, when you follow a guy that's been there for almost 30 years.
Yeah, no kidding.
But I think, you know, if you look at what's happened over the last 2 years in our local congregation, we've jammed about 20 years worth into a year and a half.
Yeah.
And really seen the faithfulness of God.
How has this impacted you personally? I mean, how has Ray David Glenn changed over the last 5 years?
Wow. Jim, I've learned to trust God deeply, deeply. My journey into Anglicanism was a process of trusting God, following his leading one step after another. in leading this faithful band of pilgrims at St. George's, we've just had to press in and trust God for everything. When we moved out of our building a year and a half ago, we didn't know where we were going.
You were forced out, right?
We were, indirectly, because the terms of the sharing arrangement while the litigation goes on for our old building made it impossible for us to do what we do. So that came down on a Monday night. On the Wednesday night, we announced that we were moving out. And on Sunday morning, God provided the chapel here at the Crossroads Center for us to worship. I mean, it's the thing personally for me has just been trusting God.
Is it disillusioning having to deal with litigation, with church politics that relates to, you know, the former era?
It could be. But the only reason that we engaged in the litigation was to bring glory to God. Yeah. We felt that it was a faithful witness to a broken world, that the gospel was something that's still worth standing up for and still worth suffering for. And so within that context, litigation isn't just about a fight or a battle. It's about joining the long line of thousands of martyrs for the faith and taking our part.
How many churches in Canada now have joined, come under the banner of ANiC?
32, with an average Sunday attendance that makes us bigger than many of the dioceses in the old Anglican Church of Canada. Yeah.
Do you have an us and them mentality?
It's something that we fight against.
Yeah.
I think one of the problems is that we could move out of this with a woundedness that's like a martyr syndrome. Oh, poor us. We're the orthodox ones, and we could become institutionally cold and orthodox or arrogant. And I think the only thing that'll change that negative self-definition being someone asks, what is the Anglican Network in Canada? If we say, well, we're not the Anglican Church of Canada, we'd have lost. I think that the important thing for us is to chart a course of faithful mission and move forward. The picture, Jim, is that of driving a car. 98% windshield, 2% rear view mirror.
Yeah. Looking ahead, not back. Very wise. Ray David Glenn is going to be our Truth to Go host, if you will, for the month of December, talking about Christmas.
Christmas, that's right.
But in a kind of a different way.
Well, I think it's important that we move the baby Jesus away from just being a cute little baby in the manger and grapple with what did this look like within the course of salvation history. The whole of history was rushing toward this moment where God tore back the curtain and inserted himself in human history in the person of Jesus as a promise, fulfillment of a promise that he had made back in Genesis 3 and Genesis 12, and we're going to move through all of those.
Terrific. Well, thanks for coming by our way for this introductory interview.
Thanks, Jim.
And I'm sure that you won't want to miss any of Ray David Glenn over the course of this upcoming Christmas month.